Greetings, dear viewers, and welcome to this BLOXHUB debate on the topic, the value of sound. How do we get better acoustics in architecture? I'll be a moderator, Morten Roar Berg. I'm the global concept developer for Saint-Gobain Ecophon, and I'll be taking you through this debate that will hopefully both be lively, interesting, and perhaps even a little bit funny. We'll see. But first, I would like to tell you out there who are with us online that this is of course not like a normal, in-studio debate. Main difference is that you are very welcome to be active while we are as well. So please write your reflections, your comments, and your questions in the chat, and we will try to get to you. And either way, we also have BLOXHUB staff active in the chat who can write to you and take you up on your requests and so on and so forth. And feel free to engage, and we can feel your energy, so good to have you with us. So again, this BLOXHUB debate is on the topic of the value of sound. And it's really riding on a BLOXHUB science talk made by Finnur Pinn, who is the CEO of Treble Technologies and also postdoctoral researcher at the University of Iceland. In this science talk, he talked about how you can integrate acoustics as a science driver in architecture. And he also led his presentation with a couple of very interesting facts around acoustics in the built environment. And to really start us off, I would like to give you some background, and I'll start here with some of these facts that he laid out. So it's really all about how we are doing with sound in the built environment, and if I was to summarize, we're not really doing that great at all. So looking at offices, if you take the biggest workplace satisfaction survey in the world, the Leesman Index, only about 30% of office workers are actually satisfied with their acoustic conditions. And this, of course, has a big bearing on the productivity of organizations. If we go to educational buildings, we are also having trouble there. That's a big English study, at least, showed that around 50% of teachers were unhappy with their sound environment. And in general, overall, over countries, teachers have around 39% higher rates of voice problems that the general public has. And we'll get back to the educational buildings. And then when it comes to hospitals, no hospitals at all. That is, 0% of hospitals really reach the WHO's guidelines for noise levels. These guidelines are extremely strict, and perhaps you can argue it's very hard to reach them at all. But what these big international studies also show is that the trend is upwards going, and now it's really, way above any acceptable level if you look at it in general. And to kind of try to give us an even broader perspective, let's take a look at environmental noise, where also WHO and also the Danish Cancer Society has made studies that show that noise exposure is linked to such things as stroke and cancer and a lot of other very troubling factors. Of course, this has a lot to do with sleep disturbances, which is of course not what we are dealing with today, but it should show us that noise has a very profound effect on human beings' health. And if I were to summarize this effect, it's a generalized stressor. So if you are in chronic stress, it could be from noise in your hearing, but it could also be from bright light in your eyes, or it could be from your shoes tightening all the time. In time, that will take up a lot of your mental power, and that mental power will go from your life, from being effective, from being yourself, so to say. So, in this debate, we have a wide array of panelists who represent a big part of the Danish building industry. Before we get to all of those, we'll start by introducing the most important person in this debate, the reason why all our jobs exist, the reason we should have buildings at all, namely the end user, the person who is actually, doing something in the building and has to, be affected by the changes in the environment that we have taken for them way beforehand they actually do their day-to-day stuff. So we have invited Maria Snerftrup, a primary school teacher, here to join us in the debate to tell us a little bit about her experience in with an acoustic renovation. So Maria, so good to have you with us. So can we hear you? Could you give us a little hello?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much.
Hello, Maria. So before this acoustic renovation, did you think at all about the sound environment and how it affected your daily life?
Yes, every day. It was a very huge part of the work environment. We were very troubled about the noise, and it was a big problem to make group work with the children in the classroom.
For sure. Okay, so you actually did notice it beforehand. So of course you could, you could detect it in your ears perhaps. You can see that, as you say, it prevents some group work. But did you notice that it has had other effects on you? For example, we mentioned the voice, but did it have other effects on you and your life?
Yes, you're very tired in your head after a day where you work in a classroom with a very bad acoustic. I think some of you have been to the Blue Planet, and imagine how it is to work in an environment like that every day. It's terrible, and you're very tired in your head after a day with 25 children running around.
Yeah, I can imagine, and that is really also a very big point that we sometimes forget in this debate, I think, because it's not just a question of actually having the problems when you teach the children, it's also a problem of you being drained in your free time. So now you are working, your work is taking up your free time because you're tired, and I don't really think that's fair. So you were working at Husum Skole, as far as I remember, and there was this acoustic renovation. So how did you experience your work after the renovation?
I think it's easier to teach in a modern way in the new classrooms because I don't think it's fair to the kids that they just have to sit and listen to the teacher talk and then they can talk one at the time. I think in a modern school you have to have group work and creative work, and it's not fair that the children are told to be quiet because of the environment. We have to have a modern environment to teach in modern ways. So I think it's very important that we changed it.
Completely agreed. And as you say, modern ways of teaching really lends itself way more not to just have you talking at the end of the classroom, but also having the kids engaged. So when this acoustic renovation happened, you had some acoustic materials installed, and then you felt it was easier for you to talk to the kids, and the kids had an easier time collaborating. But did you feel that you had more energy after work then?
Yes, definitely.
Perfect. So one thing we often discuss in this, Maria, is that acoustics is a little weird topic because not a lot of people understand it. So not all end users like yourselves perhaps know that there's problems and there's actually something to be done. Do you think people in general in your school before this renovation, or just teachers in general, do you think they know how much can actually be done by changing the acoustic environment, or is it sort of a little nerdy?
I think it's a bit nerdy. Before I became a teacher, I took a master degree in public health, and I'm also a music teacher. So I work with this for a very long time, and I'm also responsible for the work environment at my school. So this has been a high priority topic, and actually I have taught the children about acoustic environment because I think it's so important that they know that it's not because they are noisy, it's because the surroundings are not okay. So actually we build a wall with æggebakker, I don't know how to say that, to have a discussion about this problem with the children, so they were aware of the environment problem and not saw themselves as a problem. And with this wall, we made some attention to the rest of the school, so they were aware of the problem. So I think that we talked a lot about it because of this project, but before that, I don't think it was that obvious that it wasn't the children's fault.
I want to just say that none of this has been scripted, so I didn't know that she was actually doing all this beforehand. This is amazing, and I completely agree with you. I think a lot of teachers have been a little angry at their classes for making noise, where really it's not really the kids' fault. So it's just a lot of negative energy sometimes. But it really means a lot to have somebody like you out there who is knowledgeable in the schools and among the end users who can actually say that there's something to be done here. So sometimes I think from where I'm standing in my profession that we need to get more end users like you who can actually spread the word, because if we don't have the input from you guys, nothing really changes in the end, because we need to remember that it's really for you we're doing all this. So do you have anything else you want to mention before we round this off, Maria?
I don't know. I just think it's so important that grown-ups and also children knows that the environment around us are extremely important, and especially children have sometimes think that it's my fault and put it all into themselves. But I think it's so important that grown-ups are taking the responsibility to do a good environment for these children.
Couldn't agree more. So Maria, this was really amazing, way better than I had imagined. So I'm so glad I invited you. So thank you so much, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. And thanks again. This was amazing to have you with us.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Wow. Okay. So from Maria to Maria, we are switching over from the end user to now Maria, who is a sound designer, composer, and assistant professor at Aarhus University. And Maria, as a sound designer, you have a sort of an eclectic and holistic way of working with sound in different contexts that can create experiences, and thereby you really need to have a very large understanding of how sound affects people. So I want to just give the viewers an understanding of Maria's place in this debate, because she's not really an integrated, at least not yet, at least not as much as everyone else, integrated part of the building industry. She's sort of seeing this from the outside, but she is extremely knowledgeable about sound and how sound affects people. So I would like to welcome you, Marie. So nice to have you with us. One thing that I think is often forgotten when you talk about acoustics in buildings is really that it's not just about limit values and physics and so on and so forth. There's also an aesthetic aspect. So I would like to ask you just to start off with a very loose and overview, like a more like high view of the subject. Is there an aesthetic to acoustics in buildings?
Well, thank you, Morten, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and excited to hear the perspective from the school first, because it puts a lot of perspectives on the kind of approach that I'm also trying to unfold in my own work, which is actually about aesthetics. But I have this feeling that we could actually think aesthetics in a way that kind of combines the more technical acoustical world with the more soft artistic design world that I'm based in. And I would like to propose to do that through Gernot Böhme and his work on atmospheres, which is basically trying to flesh out aesthetics as something that is about the senses and about how we experience places through our senses. And so the aesthetics is not only about decoration and art, but it's about how we feel in a place. And we all know what an atmosphere is and how much it means to how we feel somewhere, but it's a slippery term, and it's really difficult to talk about atmospheres. But I really think that we should try to go into the trouble, or stay with the trouble, and discuss these affective atmospheric problems. That also is what I heard Maria talk a lot about, that it's a social thing, it's a relational thing, and also I just wanted to note that I really think there's an ethical part about this as well, which is, as Maria said, that often you turn it either inside or you turn it to someone else when you have neighbor noise, for example. And there's this new white paper by Sandra Lori, who's an anthropologist from Denmark, which actually has this conclusion as well, that because people don't really know about room acoustic and how you can implement it in your apartment, they either turn their noise problem inside or to their neighbor. So I think we need to work together to make maybe a more complex approach, but maybe an approach that can embrace all of these slippery and sensorial types of knowledge, I would say it is, that really have a big impact on our well-being and health.
Couldn't agree with you more. And of course, just to sort of reiterate some of the things you said, Burma has this interesting look at how acoustics creates atmospheres that really goes a little beyond just having limit values and looking at it strictly through an engineering lens. And this thing that you ended up at with how sound really affects our relationships between each other, I think just like Maria pointed out, is so extremely important. And I would like to see more studies done, for example, in offices and places of work, and see if perhaps the culture doesn't become a little bit more easygoing if it's not an extremely noisy atmosphere. Because I've dealt so many times with an office where people were unfriendly to each other, then we fixed the sound, and then all of a sudden everything was way more smooth. So I completely agree with you. But then, you know, you're talking about having the possibility, the potential of looking at acoustics in this sort of more aesthetic way that integrates the senses with the more engineering perspective. And do you think that right now in the way we design buildings that we actually live up to these potentials?
I think that we are going into a direction that actually seeks to embrace these. If you, for instance, look at the ISO standard on soundscape, you see that there's at least the effort to try to reach a more interdisciplinary approach to noise. However, we meet a lot of problems when we add complexity, but I would say that again, we need to stay with these problems, and maybe also include not sometimes turn the processes around and maybe start in the trouble, not in the models, but start with participatory processes of defining what is actually the problems in, for instance, before renovation. So we could kind of use this effective approach or a tuning approach to sort of narrow in on some of the dimensions that is really hard to capture through only the sound methods that we normally use.
So sort of, if I understand you correctly, Marie, sort of backwards engineering from what is the problems actually out there, and then develop an approach that is more complex, more soundscape oriented from there. I really like that.
Just one note, because maybe you could say that these affective problems, sometimes it's also the multisensory interplay between the visual and the auditory or the other senses. And that's what I have encountered through my Ph.D. work on hospitals, that it's it's intermingled into this like multisensory interplay. So it's not senses that are divided. We first of all sense a place in a whole.
Yeah. Again, very, very interesting perspectives, and it's also sort of what is so interesting about this whole field, that everything is so interconnected and has a bearing on, if you change one thing, it changes the whole. So Gitte, I would like to take it over to you now. Gitte Andersen, Global Head of Workplace Management and Design at Signal, which is, among other things, an architecture firm. And you know, as the architect in the building process, you are really the person who makes everything come together. And you, of course, get a lot of specification and details from a client, an investor, so on and so forth. And then you have to actually create something new from there. And as such, you have a huge deal of power over how the building geometry and the materials are actually going to end up. And again, those are perhaps some of the most important, those are the most important aspects of building, of room acoustics, sorry. So now we heard a little bit about aesthetics from Marie, so I'd like to take it over to you, because this was a very sound-oriented approach, perspective. And then there's also the architectural aesthetics. So I would like to hear from your perspective in your profession, how do you think like the acoustics aesthetics goes with the aesthetics of traditional modern architecture aesthetics?
Well, first of all, normally we do not do the buildings, but we are very focused on what is happening in the building, actually linking the learning processes and the people with the places and make that work. And like in many workplaces, we can see how many schools is suffering being dealt with because we have left a learning process and develop new learning processes, but the school hasn't really developed in the same path or pace. So we actually, like the teacher is saying, we have to do a lot of learning processes in schools that was meant to where you sit for 45 minutes and really kept quiet while the teacher is teaching something to you. So most important, I think it is worth focusing on the aesthetics in a way where we actually acknowledge what is actually going to take place in these spaces. For instance, flip learning processes where you present, where you focus, where you experiment, where you do a lot of different things and flip between it, very dynamic. But when we enter a school, and I have been visiting so many schools around Denmark, for instance, you see a one-size-fits-all when it comes to acoustics, and it's pretty sad to see that we are so much behind there. So it's great to hear that you actually experimented, Maria, with these how do you say it?
I think she left us, but it's okay. We have a nice picture of her to remember.
Nevertheless, I keep on looking at her, So we need to go out and experiment and actually involve the end user. What kind of didactic and learning processes do want to take place, so we can talk about the experience of the sound, the experience and the quality of it, and then from there let all our technical people who design and so on solve it from there. But we have to start with what we want to experience, what we leave when we leave the room, what kind of feeling we leave it with.
Well, very, very interesting perspectives, and I will get back to you on some of those, but I think I'll double back to my original question here, because I think it's really important, and I'd like to have the big
So I didn't answer your question, I can hear.
Like I take it down a bit.
Okay.
So okay, you say that you primarily work with not creating the buildings, but making them function.
What's happening inside. Yeah.
So I'm trying to ask you as a representative of architects, so you can also tell me what you think your colleagues would say. Because I have encountered several times that some architects are not really happy about what they can create in a traditional architecture sense with acoustic materials. So do you have any perspective on this, like how acoustic materials fits into the aesthetics of architecture?
Yeah, of course I have. I mean, I will always say that it's important that things is aesthetic. Even small kids at 3 years can tell the difference between ugly and nice, and actually acknowledge when something really has been cared about with a lot of love and creativity. So of course that's important. Saying that, I mean, there is a necessity to have a more diverse range of products and way of dealing with this. Also to make it more mobile. I mean, we have multi-purpose rooms at schools, and everything is multi-purpose these days, where you can do gym, and you can do theatre, and you can do lecture, and you can do examinations in the same big space with the same one-size-fits-all acoustic, and everyone can, I mean, think that this is not going to work because it's never going to be good for anybody. So we need some kind of products that can be flexible, agile, add-on, taken away, and maybe also look much more beautiful than we do today. I mean, and don't be scared of using colors.
Yeah, for sure. So as I hear you, it could be good to have more choices when it comes to acoustic products.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and also work with all surfaces and not only ceilings and floors. I mean, it could maybe also be something we add to the furniture.
Yeah.
I mean, we really need to think out of the box here. And when looking at how we do it today, it's pretty limited, right?
Okay. Yeah. So I think. No, I want to stay with you for a while, Gitte. So this one size fits all. So I want to make sure that our listeners who are perhaps not as knowledgeable about the field as us understand. So we have some pretty strict rules around acoustics in Denmark. And you feel like the acoustics that arises in the buildings, the atmosphere, as we were talking about, on the account of these rules, it becomes a little one-size-fits-all, as you say. It isn't possible to change it. It isn't possible to have the experience of something else, and that creates problems in your view. So I'm just reiterating.
Yeah, for sure, and it's the same with working environment. We have some recommendations about how should the acoustic be in a meeting room like this or in a working environment like this. But we are, today we are working activity-based. A lot of tasks and things is going on, and sometimes you need to be in a box and focus, and sometimes it's really, really nice to be in a place where you can feel the informal buzz and in another acoustic climate that get your pulse up in a nice way, where you can feel you are among people who is actually mingling and such things. And it's the same with learning environments. But creating these recommendations with a lack of variety, I actually think that we force things into to be dull and boring.
Okay, that's a strong point. So I think I'll take it from you. We'll get back to your points on the one-size-fits-all and different acoustic atmosphere for different stuff. But Jesper, I would like to take it over to you. Jesper Bo Andersen, you are the chief consultant at Rambøll, and to me you are also the godfather of sustainable acoustics in Denmark, as I in 2013 read the first article on this subject ever, and that was from you. So as an acoustician in this debate, you have yourself to represent, but you also represent the acousticians as such. And the acousticians are the specialists who really, most oftentimes, are hired in to consult the architects, or it could also be another part of the stakeholder, like the value chain. And you do consultancy on materials, you do simulations, calculations to see how it holds up to the functional values, and you also go out and measure after the building has actually been built to see if it holds up. So that's sort of a very brief understanding of what you're doing. So following up the discussion with Gitte, in your experience through the years of advising numerous architects, Jesper, you are put into their process of design, and then you are asked to consult on the acoustics. In your experience, do you think there's something that they could be doing a little bit better at, or some way that they could, accommodate the acoustics in a better way to, perhaps make it more effective or better for the end user?
I think there are a wide variety of architects in the world, and of course you can't put them in a box. I think generally they're actually quite skilled when it comes to balancing acoustics and architecture. I think the problem is lying elsewhere. I don't think that we have the freedom maybe to go in and look at what the users actually need, because that's also partly why I wrote the article in 2013, which is 8 years ago, because I hate requirements and I love requirements. I hate them. No, I'll start why I love them, because I love them because otherwise, if we didn't have any requirements, it would probably be a lot worse. We would not have any acoustics. Or we would have acoustics in classrooms, but very bad acoustics probably. And I hate requirements because it also makes it possible to ask, do we fulfill the requirements? And yes, we do. But is that sufficient to have a nice environment? That's not always the case. So it makes it a bit square to look at the you have one value to sort of judge the whole building on just the requirement value. So we would like to have more room to make a good solution.
So as I hear you really are in a dilemma, because you don't really want to put away the requirements totally.
No.
But you want to make sure that we actually doing something about this. And in the debate on daylight, we had we had an engineer from Mo saying that usually what happens with daylight is that it's being designed sort of okay as long as it's within price frames and not something that is toxic. And I like that because it was sort of on the nose. So we need some requirements, as you say, but perhaps it's not the end-all be-all.
No, and I also thought about, is it better to have very complex requirements that maybe could incorporate some of those more, we tend to call them the more soft values, but it just becomes very complex to document that we fulfill these requirements.
I want to double back to the first question I gave you. Not that you have to answer it again, you answered it fine, but I just wanted to say that there is other people who have this feeling. There's a person called Robert Affel who wrote a book called Deaf Architects, Blind Acousticians, who kind of makes it a problem that architects are a little more visual, or where acousticians perhaps are not really aware of how the building comes together, but just wants to put a lot of stuff in there. But you don't see this as a thing in your experience?
Yes, I do. Sometimes we have this classic clash between what skills we need to sort of defend. But I think that architects also need to make it a visually nice environment. That's of course their main job as they see it. But then we also know that the room doesn't feel nice if it's not both even daylight and architecture and acoustics, and there are probably also air quality and a thousand other things that have to be okay for the room to be okay. So I think it's more about the complex balancing between architecture and acoustics, and of course the visual thing is the main focus for architects. That's only natural.
So I know that I'm kind of taking you and holding you up against an argument that you didn't propose yourself, but I hope you indulge me.
No, but I mean, it is a conflict that we see sometimes.
Okay,
that's right.
So then a part of that discussion that I didn't invent it, but the discussion is that acoustics is often treated in the end of a design process, or by later, very late in the design process, and by then there's less money, less time, and if you change something, it sort of messes with the whole deal. So, could there be an idea of trying to, you don't have to have the acoustician coming in and saying like this from the get-go, but could we get better at integrating acoustics from the beginning of this design process?
Definitely, yeah. We always repeat that actually. That's always get early on the project. That's always the key for a good project.
Thank you for now, Jesper. We are having a really great debate, but it's taking a little time to get through all of you because you have so many interesting points. But Mette Boye, Ph.d. and Chief City Architect of Aarhus, it's so nice to have you with us. You hearing us okay?
Thank you.
Yes?
Yes, thank you.
So in your position as Chief Architect, you have a very broad sort of perspective in mind, and also the long perspective in mind. And you have an influence over a wide array of projects where people like Gitte or Jesper might be involved with one project at a time and go very deep into it. But also in your specific background, you know a lot about urban planning and development and how you sort of create a whole in a city and also look ahead. So you are the right person to ask the big questions, such as I see it. So the main topic, what is the value of sound? I would like to pose that to you because it's not always clear to anybody what that actually is. And I know it's a very big question and kind of hard to answer as such, but what comes to mind when I pose this to you? What's the value of sound?
Well, first of all, I am quite happy to be invited here, even though I have a more holistic approach to working with the city. As a city architect, and when you ask me what is the value of sound, I'm really happy that a debate like this involves Gert Bøhmer's aesthetic approach and how it involves our senses. Because I think when we are to work with, for example, acoustics and sound in both actually in our urban environment, but also in our buildings, it is this way of how we feel that we are placed, or what is the feeling of being in this space, and that actually both goes for the urban spaces and the interior spaces. What I did when I was invited here is actually that I made a phone call to one of my colleagues, Christopher Vengård, because I knew that he was making a project on acoustic and indoor climate in our schools. And as a city architect, one of the things that I'm interested in, not just solving one building, but actually to try to see how can we raise the level of architecture and the way of being inside buildings throughout the whole city. So when we had a discussion about this, we talked about the pilot projects that we're doing in Aarhus. And what we're trying to do is that we take a holistic approach to indoor climate. So it's not just about acoustics, but it's also about daylight and the indoor climate. And one of the things that we discussed, or what we're trying to do, is that when we talk about acoustics, we talk about acoustics in the perspective of the children. We do care about the teachers, but when we try to measure the sound, we do it from the height of the children. We also try to solve some of the acoustic problems with using not just the ceiling and not just the walls, but also the furniture to approach this. And when we talk about especially schools and acoustics, it's quite important because it has a huge impact on learning abilities. When you can't hear, you use your mind to focus, you use your mind space or your mind power to listen, and that takes away the ability to learn and to think. So it's actually really important aspects in terms of learning. And I think one of the really interesting things that might be interesting to other places or other cities is that we have tried to introduce something that we call space supervisors. Because I think we all know that when we try to work with our spaces and to create to control our indoor climate only through technical solutions, we tend to see that the users are using it in a different way that we intended. So what we're trying to do is we teach some of the teachers to use the spaces and also to understand what is the impact on how they use the spaces and how they can use the spaces. So this is not about the space defining the didactics, but actually the other way around, that when you know about the acoustics, you can also use the sound, and you can move around the furniture. You can adapt your didactic methods to have smaller groups and to move it inside and outside and work in larger groups and so forth. But this way of knowing about what is acoustics, like Maria is saying, or how you can work with the indoor climate is actually quite important. And somehow we have sort of been separated from using our buildings as people. So this way of knowing, actually you can actually open with a window, or you can move this, or you can do something like that, is really quite important, I think. So it's also a matter of knowing that when we have a didactic approach to teaching, to how we teach today, one thing we know for sure is that in 2 years' time, we want to do it in another way. So in that sense, our buildings need to be very flexible. And that also means that when we set up very technical solutions, they need also to be flexible. So this way of actually being able to work together with the building is quite important. So these space supervisors, they take responsibility of knowing things about that, and they transfer that knowledge to their colleagues.
Quite amazing. And in that way, you actually kind of do what we talked with Maria about, which is kind of educating the end users in this process. So while they are learning to use the space, they also become more knowledgeable about how the space affects them. And that perhaps will create better buildings in the future because we actually have engaged end users. So I think that's amazing. So I'll pose you a more direct and a technical question now, because you of course also sort of represent the investor or the client from the city of Aarhus, where you actually build a lot of stuff. And from a more technical perspective, when you structure the requirements, functional requirements like tender specifications and such for building programs, or perhaps provide wishes or whatever for the architects to design. Do you see any way that you now are doing, or you could do in the future, to perhaps make sure that acoustics is taken better care of?
I think first of all, then when we put together requirements like that, it's not just one person that is doing that. We're actually using the knowledge, for example, from these pilot projects to integrate in our demands to our when we put out a bid. So in that sense, it's not just one person, and we also go into a dialogue with the ones that are the teachers that are supposed to teach in the school, or if it's a new school, we use references groups and so forth. So it's not just one person making all the requirements. But one thing I know that we're trying to do is that we actually have lowered the demands in general, not just when we ask for new projects, but in general, we have been trying to lower the demands for reverberation. So we are a little bit lower than the actual requirements.
So that's really water on your mill, Gitte.
It is for sure. It is for sure. Let's start involving the end user and understand how they want to teach. So we can. We all want to do great, right? So if we could experiment a little more, work together in other ways a little more, early phases, and really involve the end user in the very beginning. Then I really think we could do much greater than we do today. For sure, I agree. And now we're going to take our last panelist, and I must say the time has been running for me because I think we're having such great discussions. But I would like to have a whole 3 hours of this. I believe I could do that, but that's for another time. But Pierre, to you. You are an acoustic specialist in VELFAC and former acoustician in the Strategic Partnership Trust. And Pierre, so you're an acoustician like Jesper, but really we invited you here today because we wanted to have you represent Trust, and it's a sort of a special strategic partnership we have in Denmark that I don't think people are doing a lot of other places, at least in the way that we're doing here. So could you start by just telling us a little bit about what Trust is and how you work in Trust?
I'll try. Shortly, Trust, it's a decision made by the city of Copenhagen 4 or 5 years ago to put in a pool many renovation and expansion projects of schools and kindergartens. And the idea from the city is, why not try to put all those projects together and then you choose one contractor with one designing team running the full period. And I think it's about the time is running now for the first 4 years, and they've been working on 39 schools and kindergarten. And I've been involved for the first 2 years of them as the acoustic engineer. So that's the whole formalia about Trust.
What sort of different dynamics does that create when you have everything sort of controlled or sort of insulated in one locked team?
Yeah, well, the interesting part is that all of the team, first they work at the same place. They had a project office. So the architects, the contractors, at the start we were designing everything, so they were also sitting all the most of the time at the office. Architects, engineers, landscape architects. And the first month, I mean, it's still people that have to find out how they work together. So the first few months you have to find out. The first project we use a lot of time on the initial phases. So I've been asked many times about input to the specification, or many workshops with the end users. For all projects, for example, I've been asked to go and do a feasibility study in the schools. So we've been out and measuring in every school of the projects, so that we had this objective baseline. That's how it is today. But the more we work together, I mean, that was the whole point of it from a designing team perspective. The good ideas, you use them again. The bad ideas, you remember them and you say it to your colleague working on the next school. And that's kind of the problem in the building industry. You make a team, you build together for 2 years, you explode the team. All of the good holistic ideas that come from the collaboration, that die with the project. That was the whole idea. And then you have to be careful about aesthetic, because many people working on the in many projects. But my experience of it is that as an architect, we're really good at working with the context of the schools. I mean, that kind of collaboration is you couldn't do that with new buildings. Like taking the same the same team and build 20 new schools. But when it's renovation and they have strong identity, these schools, aula school, that it's somehow, it was natural that it became different solutions. But the technical behind the aesthetic, we could reuse some of the good solution that we could see in the first project, where we had the measurement at the beginning, and then we had the possibility to make a mock-up in one school classroom. Sorry. Where we could check, it works as we predicted.
So this is again a very special way of working, and it seems like it's very effective. But do you see any way we could learn something from trust in the rest of the building industry? I think what you just said was like you should be working together project after project after project. Perhaps that's not realistic, but this way of starting the project off, perhaps by everyone being in the same room, or do you have other ideas of what we can learn from trust?
I mean, the part that we used many hours in the initial phases and way less hours where we were building, as we usually work, because we knew that we could reuse a lot of the design. As you had such an incitement on working on the design first off. I don't know how you could create this incitement when it's a single project, but I mean that's where the good ideas come, and the thing we used a lot of time on, because we were sitting in the same rooms, it was this informal chit chat. An architect has a really good idea, come to me, hey, I thought about this furniture, could we do it in acoustic furniture? And then we take this discussion. Now it takes 5 minutes, I don't need to put it on my timesheet and get it's all these dynamics that also
And there you touch about another very important point about registering all of your hours in the building industry, which is really kind of sort of a special thing that we're doing. That means that everything does become kind of locked, right? But to reach everybody and also to have a little intermezzo before we reach the end statements, where we have just had one of you at a time, we'll go over to you, Andrew. So Andrew Parkin, you are the Chief Acoustician of Cundall Acoustics, and you are with us all the way from the UK. And we were hoping that you were having a project for us today where you could show how acoustics can be integrated in the design process from the beginning, so we would have an example before we round things off. Andy, can you hear me, and are you with us?
Yep, I'm here and I can hear you. Yep, I'm just still shocked at seeing multiple people in the same building, in the same room. It's not something that happens in the UK at the moment, so it's nice to see. Yeah, so there are some slides, I think, if they can be put on screen. Brilliant, wonderful. So yeah, so it's been interesting hearing so far about things like acoustic materials are boring, not using all the senses, things like that. So hopefully we can shed a bit of a glimmer of hope on that. So I just want to run you through some slides talking about the offices that we designed for ourselves. We very much take the idea that we experiment on our own offices, on our own people, and that then leads us to how we can design for our clients. So if we could have the next slide, please. This kind of permeates through everything that we do. We're the world's first carbon neutral engineering consultancy, and sustainability has been at the core of everything that we've done throughout our existence, and that's a driving factor in everything we do. And so one of the things I want us to think about is biophilia and biomimicry in design, being in touch with nature and letting that drive the way that we design. Okay, next slide. And we are a multidisciplinary consultancy, and so this is a list of our services, but the project that I just want to show you some slides from, it involved acousticians. Sorry, the previous slide again. Yeah, it involved acousticians, it involved air quality, building automation, building services, fire engineering, health and well-being, IT, audio-visual, lighting design, and good projects need to involve everything all at once, working together, otherwise they fail. Okay, next slide. So just two elements of the building. First of all, the front of house, the visitor experience and the staff welfare. So next slide. This is our reception desk. It's a beautiful desk. It's a repurposed desk. It's been reclad, but just to talk you through here, so you come into our office and you're welcomed by the receptionist, or you were before lockdown and we all had to work from home. But the key things here are that we've got acoustic rafts over the reception desk, and the artwork behind serves multiple functions. It's actually the MEP riser cupboard. But on the front of it is the materials there are all materials that are used in the design of the fit out. So it's like a sample board, but they include acoustically absorbent panels as well. So it's got a good intimate environment in the reception. Next slide. And that backs on to our town hall space. And our town hall space is a great place to be. It's a place where up to 30% of our staff can meet together to have lunch and meals together. We can have meetings for the whole office of about 100 people. But it's a very multisensory experience as well. You can see there on the left we have a water wall, so it's constantly running water. The benefits there, it looks great, it catches your eye. Also, you can hear the sound of the running water, which is great in itself. Just a note there, if you can hear running water but you can't see it, or if you can see it but you can't hear it, that's a problem. But if you can hear it and see it, then that's great. Also, you get the evaporative cooling from it as well, and it helps with relative humidity, so that's all great. We also use soundscaping in this space. We have birdsong being run through the loudspeakers. So mixing the birdsong with the visual of the water wall, with the visual and the tactility of the plants, it gives you that multisensory experience. And then we have sound absorbent rafts above as well to control the sound in the space. Okay, next slide. And in the meeting rooms, they're quite unusual shaped meeting rooms because the building at this end is a curve. But we have again, we have all exposed surfaces everywhere. We have absorbent rafts above the desks. We have Class A wall panels on the walls, because all these meeting rooms are used for video conferencing, as are all our desks. And then good control of sound insulation between the corridor and also between room to room as well. And then running into the working areas, into the next slide, please. So the space for where we work and collaborate, because ultimately that's what an office is. And I think as we go back into offices after COVID, offices will be a place for collaboration. It will be a place to go to meet people, not just a place to go to do work. Okay, next slide. So this is our office. We're split over 2 floors, and we thought that, well, the best way to split over 2 floors is to have a staircase that connects it. We love our staircase. It's a beautiful thing. It's very intricately designed. It's based on biophilic principles. It's a very lean design as well. It's all timber, and it's this like skeletal, helical effect. Above the staircase, linking the 2 floors, is this installation that we've made from recycled single-use plastic. Sound absorbent, not boring, not standard, not lacking of colour. And as you can see, it links the 2 spaces. And then on to the next slide, please. Yeah, just a note on the staircase. It's won numerous awards, and it was in the top 10 of Design's staircases of 2019, I think, globally. So we're really proud of it and our design. So wonderful. Just on the you see the lighting there as well. Because this is in the center of the office, what we have at the top of the staircase is a halo of 12 lights, and those lights change in intensity and go round a circuit, so they mimic the sun's changing angle, and so you get these different shadows cast across the office at different times of day, which again, it's really cool, but very simple as well. Next slide. And as we go upstairs, you can see we've got this like DNA helix, helix that intertwines around the helix of the stairs. Made from this sound absorbing material, which then has like a hive from the same material as sound absorption there. You can just about see on the left hand side there's like a lattice which is made from sound absorbent PET as well. On the right hand side there are more traditional mineral fiber rafts as well. Next slide. And just looking down the office from upstairs, we've got lots of natural materials, absorptive desk dividers, lots of planting, this lattice going down the right-hand side there, and cardboard ductwork as well. Very recycled material, very lightweight as well. Looks really great and works really well as well. And then the next slide. Just sort of a final thought, really. We believe heavily in sustainability, as we've said, and we've invested very heavily in making our places great places to work. And so the next slide shows that we received WELL Gold certification for this. We were actually just 3 points from WELL Platinum, which is really difficult to get. We strategically chose not to go for WELL Platinum. The extra 3 points we could have got wouldn't have added value to our people or to our office, so we decided to keep with what we had. But people love it, and we can't wait to get back into it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andy. I've been a fan of you for a long time, so I hope to meet you in real life someday when all of this stuff is over. But thank you so much for showing us your office. And yes, I must say, it doesn't look standard, and does have colors, so we can agree there. So thank you so much.
It has colors and sounds and sights, everything.
Everything. Well, amazing. Thank you, Andy. So I don't think we will have a lot of time to discuss the project, unfortunately, but we will have to do some ending remarks from all of you. And I hope that you will take the time to see if you can come up with one piece of advice to an audience of your choice to create better acoustics in the built environment. So again, that could be from a sound designer to an architect to an acoustician, so on and so forth. Do you have one piece of advice that you can come up with to kind of see if we can create a better sounding world? Because in the world we're living in now, 90% of our time is spent indoors, and we all more or less have ears and need a good sound environment. So the numbers say that we're not doing that well. How do you think we can improve? Could you give an advice to audience of your choice? And I think Andy will let you go first, as you are from abroad, and you sort of, like Maria, has an outsider's perspective. So could you give us one piece of advice?
I think it's been referred to that architects design with their eyes rather than their ears, which can be the case, but it's also just as bad if acousticians design with their ears, not with their eyes. Design is a collaborative process. It needs everyone to engage in it. It needs everyone to collaborate with each other. And great designs come when people work together and design and link all the senses together rather than just concentrating on their own little interest point.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And I must say we lost Mette Boye, who had to leave at 17. So we'll not get her ending remark today, but we'll go over to the second, outsider looking into the construction industry from a little bit from the outside. So back to you, Marie. Do you have any advice on how we could get better sound environments and acoustics in the construction industry?
Well, the problem is that actually Andrew said almost just better what I was trying to say. so
Sorry.
I'll try. Yeah, no problem. But I'm working right now on delivery rooms with making an atmosphere design that thinks about the senses in a multisensory way and the interplay and the bodily situation. And I just have one note there, that because sometimes the woman giving birth are in a tub, which is with hot water, and they can get a bit hot, too hot feeling. And actually just changing the atmosphere in the room with a winter setting, with sounds as well from winter, suddenly they feel that the temperature is lower, and they ask the people working there if they took the temperature down. So it's a very, very precise way of just noting how much our senses work together and our bodily situation. So that would be my way of framing that.
Okay, thank you. And then I think we'll go sort of the wrong way around and take you, Pierre, and then Gitte, and then end off with you, Jesper. So Pierre, do you have one piece of advice for us? Could also be for a specific audience, of course.
Yeah, actually I thought that maybe to all of us acousticians, if we could use a bit more time to present sound examples of what we're working about. We're coming with numbers. It's going to be in 0.6 seconds. I mean, nobody cares.
Yeah.
So it's all about if we want to work with sensations, we have to bring it. Architects, they work with drawings and 3D. You can see what they're doing. It's visual. We work with sounds. We have to bring sound examples.
Yeah. And we can do that.
And we can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So well, I've been in a lot of acousticians presentations with no sound examples at all. so you can do that, but yeah. So I think it's a really, really cool piece of advice. And I just want to mention Finua's presentation, Science Talk here on this same YouTube channel, was dealing with this very thing that you're pointing out, Pierre. And if you are interested in this sort of subject, that is a must-see. So I can only give that my highest recommendations. So Gitte, to you now.
Yeah.
So do you have a piece of advice for an audience, or just in
have.
general? I know you have.
Well, we could start involve the end users, the one we are actually designing to understand what is actually going to take place in the spaces we are designing, so they can deliver what they are doing best. And then maybe also start to measure, so we can actually document the return of investment by investing in good acoustics. The rise of the, increased productivity, increased learning, increased satisfaction, increased welfare, mental well-being. There are so many topics we could measure. And I think if we could measure multiple time of return of investment, then we really could crack it on and start to experiment much wider than we do today.
I think that's an awesome piece of advice, and it was also one that came up in the last debate around sunlight, that the ROI, the return on investment, is not that clear. Even if we have a lot of good studies on it has this effect on stress or whatever, that we need to have the economic argument better really fleshed out.
Yeah. And maybe also measure it on the students.
Yeah.
I mean, they have lots of opinions about good places to be in, even small kids.
Yeah. So I want to mention that we probably have had a lot of resources posted in the chat during all of this. So please have a look into the chat, because there we have put in some research summaries and some links and so on and so forth. Also some handbooks. So if you want to know more about this subject after we are done today, there's resources there for you. So Jesper, we'll ask you, do you have a piece of advice for any audience or in general?
I think, or I hope it actually sums up the other advices, because that would be a nice ending. But I think that the projects that I have been a part of that has been really successful, also in these parts of it, has been where the building owner has an opinion of the quality level of the acoustics that he wants or she wants. So actually, as the first part of the project, define what you want this building to be able to do, and then when the building owner has this opinion, we can help them gain this opinion. Then it tends to happen this user process, and we get some maybe a little more space to define other things than just the requirements. So I think it starts by the man or woman with the money.
Yeah. Yes.
Not because it's necessarily more expensive, I guess. I mean, in the long run, it's probably...
But if we can document return on investment...
That's what we want to do, yes.
Yes. Then it's all of a sudden a
and maybe question. It's, in the long run, it's actually cheaper.
I think it is.
I think we're coming to the end of what was actually also sort of like one of the major points in the debate on sunlight, on light in general. That in the end it really has a lot to do with money as well, and you have to calculate that in. So all the studies that we have on return on investment, we need to put those front and center, so people really know that it helps them. But I want to pose another question for you before we really round off, and that is there perhaps also a problem of divided budgets? Because if you have a person building the building, they want to build a cheap building for some people who can just rent the space, and they are not that invested in what's going to go on in the space. So is these sort of separated budgets a problem? Because if the person building the building, making the specification requirements, if he had to bear the cost of the lost productivity and such, perhaps he would think differently. So do you think there's a problem around that?
I mean, if you make a lousy building, who want to rent it?
Okay.
If it's cheap.
But that's not really an issue any longer. I mean, most employers know that it's not about finding a cheap place to work, because then he will never be able to attract and retain talent. So, I mean, we are behind. We can put that behind us. It's another agenda we're talking about today.
I must say that I in my experience, I've seen a lot of places where people just are sitting in. It goes a little bit back to our discussion with Mette, Maria, the primary school teacher we started with, that sometimes people don't understand really how big an effect the environment has on them.
Yeah, of course you can find example of anything, but I think the general perception is we all want to do great. Also investors. I mean, if they invest in developing real estate and buildings, I mean, that's a long-term investment. Why should they make shit? I don't really get it.
Well, it's definitely one way of looking at it. I can say from my, we'll go directly to you, Pierre.
I had when you think sustainability, if we take DGNB. It's the one you use most. How do you call it? Certification.
Yeah.
Then you make a calculation for the life cycle assessment of the building. How much money do you use on putting energy in the building? And then you think 50 years. Then you make the same for all the environment and the economy. But the economy is only the economy of the building. When you talk about all this return on investment, if you have data, then you could put it in and actually have the calculation for
I fully agree.
Yeah, I mean,
we are in lack of all the data about human dynamics, and I mean, what we are designing for is people. So let's get the people data in there, because that's what we are aiming for.
Well, completely agree. So I think we have 5 minutes left, and if there's any perspectives that you wanna just get in there, I'm primarily talking to the guys in the studio, but we also still have both Andrew and Maria here. So if there's anybody who wanna have a remark before we round this off, I think we're good. Yeah, Marie. No, go ahead.
It's really difficult to talk from here, but I would say very much in line what you just discussed, that I think we need to develop methods to pretend that we can capture the affective. I know it's a problem, and the atmospheric. I know it's a problem, and I know it's a bit messy, but I think that we are actually we can talk about affective data, and we can talk about measuring experience, and we need to develop that to be able to put this into like the knowledge that we have when we build.
Completely agreed. So I think that's actually a good point to round off on. So this debate has been on the value of sound, how we get better acoustics in architecture. And we have had the pleasure of having several people here in the panel. We had Maria Snerftrup, who was a primary school teacher, and we have also had Mette Boye, who left around 17. Then we have Andrew Parkin of Cundall Acoustics, and we had Maria of Aarhus University, Jesper Bo Andersen, got it, Chief Consultant at Rambøll, and Gitte Andersen from Signal, and Pierre Marie of VELFAC. So I want to thank all of you, and then I want to request to you in the audience, if you are invested and interested in this subject, that you take it into your own hands to try to see what you can do to improve the sound environment where you are at, and in a general way, help people understand the importance of sound and good acoustics. So I want to thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the sources in the chat. And if you are in need of any knowledge on this, or contact to the panelists here today, I'm very willing to help. So you can find me on LinkedIn or wherever. Also, if there's references we've discussed here that you can't find, I'll be happy to help you. So I think I'll round this off for today and say thank you, and thanks guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.